What is up? It's Brandon from Tattooing 101, and today we're going to do something a little differently. I'm going to tell you funny tattoo mistake stories that I've seen throughout my career that might not necessarily be funny when it actually happened, but now that I'm looking back on things, it was a funny experience and a good story still to this day. So I have a couple stories I wanted to tell you guys to lighten the mood, and so you could actually hear some tattoo stories that you'll see if you are getting into this industry. As always, if you're starting on your tattooing journey and want to learn more about tattooing, make sure you like and subscribe down below so you can keep up to date with the new videos we make each week. So let's get into the stories that I've seen throughout my career. So I'm sure I've worked at plenty of different tattoo studios with the 13 years that I've been tattooing, and I've seen quite a few different mistakes and funny stories throughout that journey. I'm going to pick a few for you guys in this video of the ones that just come right to mind whenever I'm thinking about funny tattoo mistakes. So the first one I'm going to start out with, because I'm sure every single person, if they've gone through their career, has a story about this, and that's misspelling a tattoo. So I was tattooing in a studio, and one of the people tattooing right beside me was tattooing, drew everything up, and it was a big Bible verse. I remember he had to redo it a few times just because they didn't like the way it was set up, so he had to move things around and kind of separate it in different ways to make a paragraph. And at one point, he got super frustrated and went and just printed it off without really checking it or double checking it again. Now, the first time he had the customer look over the whole thing and approve it, but since then he's changed a few things to it and printed it off, stenciled it up, and put it on the body. Now, he did ask and make sure from the client, he said, look over it, make sure the spelling's correct. But obviously it was tattooed on the side and he was looking at it in a mirror, so he didn't have the appropriate way to look through everything and check the spelling because it was a ton of words. So he went through the tattoo, obviously was super frustrated. He just wanted to get it over with, get him out the door, and go on to the next tattoo. A couple days later, he came into work super frustrated and angry. And I was like, what's going on, man? And I guess the client reached out to him saying that he completely messed up his tattoo. He didn't misspell a word, but forgot a word completely. What? So there was a part of the paragraph or the sentence that just skipped to the next word and missed a huge area in between. Now, there was no way he could fix this because obviously the two words were right up back to back, that there was no way to squeeze in that other word in the midst of this huge paragraph. So it was a completely botched tattoo. The client ended up just getting super irate.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
And it pretty much ended with that. He said that I'll cover it up, things like that, but the tattoo was so huge that he'd pretty much have to tattoo a whole huge tattoo to cover up, this script that was, probably 12 inches long. So that was something I was like, I really need to pay attention to this guy's mistakes so it doesn't happen to me. So that's why it's still to this day, I'll check my spelling 3 times, have my client look over it, have their friend that came with them look over it. I'll even take a picture after I do the stencil and tell them to look over it again, because I do not want to have that feeling. Just by looking at his face, I could tell how terrible he felt on the inside, and I just don't want to go through that. So super important, check your spelling so you don't have to go through that. Next would be a problem with tattooing in white. So I've learned throughout my career and picked up on different mistakes that other people have made to help out with my career. So with this one, someone was getting a white tattoo, so therefore it's outlined in white. They end up healing kind of like scars. They lighten up a lot, so it's not as prominent as it normally would be as soon as you do it. So the guy that did it was in a rush. He immediately stenciled, and it was a very, very small stencil. It was just a word. Stenciled it and didn't give it time to dry, and immediately went in with the white ink, and the ink actually mixed with the blue. So instead of it being a white tattoo, it mixed with the blue and made it this off blue color. Oh! Ew! Which obviously is not what the client wanted. They got really upset about looking down and seeing this really weird blue color in their white ink. Luckily with healing, it did lighten up, but you could still tell that it tainted the white just enough for it to be noticeable forever. So that's one thing I picked up with that story, that anytime I'm doing a white tattoo, I'm going to put the stencil on, pretty much wipe it almost completely away before going in and actually tattooing it. So that's a tip that you could pick up from that story so you don't have to go through the same thing. So the next would be about using new materials. So there was an artist that never used bug pins before in his life. He ran out of the cartridge size that he needed, and he asked me for the size that he was going to use. I didn't have any of the appropriate size. I believe it was a 7-round liner, so I ended up giving him a bug pin 7-round liner. I told him that it's going to be a lot smaller, it's going to run like a 5, but if you use it correctly, it'll be no problem. Unfortunately, he was tattooing this very noticeable part of the body. It was actually on a face. So when he went to do the tattoo, everything seemed fine until the next day. Everything looked super blown out. The problem with that was you have to use bug pins a little bit differently. You can't go as hard into the skin as you normally would. You have to be super delicate because it seems to just really slice into the skin very easily, which caused a blowout. So now with this dude's face tattoo, luckily it was a traditional style tattoo. He had to go back in with an actual 7 liner after it healed up for about a month and thicken up the lines, which is not what the customer wanted to begin with. But luckily he had a chance to go in and fix the design, and it turned out to be a good tattoo.
Great success.
But that's one thing you want to think about is anytime you're using new materials, things like that, make sure you know exactly what you are doing and what you are using before going on a tattoo an actual client. Or you could run into that problem of messing up a face tattoo. Which obviously, if there was any place on the body that I would not want to mess up, it would be on the face. You know, if I had a blown out tattoo on my arm, which I've had plenty of trying to learn on myself, that's not too bad. But doing it on the face, that is just a terrible situation. And probably the most detrimental memory that I have involving tattooing would be this story. Someone was getting a full chest piece that was going up on the client's neck. So what happened was they laid the client down, laid the stencil, all while the client was still laying down. They took a break. The client was just getting comfortable. They didn't get up, anything like that. He said, check it out. They just looked down. Everything was fine. Well, when they went to stand up, when the tattoo was over, the whole design was crooked. Just from the way he was laying on the table, changed the whole way that the skin was laying and everything. So when he finally did stand up and look in the mirror, his face just dropped. I remember I was tattooing and I started to hear yelling coming out from the other stations, and I was like, what's going on? I'm going to take a break. Let me make sure everything's all right, and then I'll come back in just a second. So I went out of my station and just heard this dude screaming, saying he destroyed his tattoo, destroyed his whole neck tattoo, all sorts of stuff. And the client ended up actually pulling out a knife.
Oh, hell no!
Which is a crazy thing in general to see, especially in a tattoo studio. I'm sure that there's tons of stories like that out there with crazy things in tattoo studios, but this was the first time I've actually seen it firsthand. So I was like completely thrown away by what just happened. It did get calmed down. You know, he talked it over. He was like, I'm going to do whatever I can to fix it, all of these things. But that's one thing that stuck in my mind, obviously for the knife reason. But other reasons is I always stand up my clients and tell them to stand naturally. If they try to distort or stand differently by any means, it could destroy the stencil and how it lays on the body. So that's probably one of the biggest points that I've picked up from someone else's mistake my whole tattooing career. Luckily, it went over well. No one got stabbed or anything like that, which would have been a whole nother story completely. And my client didn't see anything. They just heard yelling. I came back, explained the situation, obviously leaving out the knife part, and everything went smoothly after that. I don't know if that artist ended up going back and fixing that tattoo or not. I never saw the client again. I ended up leaving shops, but I'm sure it was resolved and fixed after that point. But these are the funny and crazy tattoo stories that I have that I've picked up throughout my career. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.